Hey guys, and welcome to episode 5 of how to make a Moba in Unity tutorial. In today's episode we're going to cover something a little bit different. We're going to cover our camera controls and setting up a minimap for the game. But first off, setting up our camera controls. If you remember where we last left off, when we click play, you'll notice that we'll be able to move the player and the camera's locked to the player. So we're going to need to give the player options to look around the map, look around what's going on around them without just being focused on the player. So they have to be able to toggle whether or not the camera's locked. So if we just go to our main camera and we pull up the camera script, and then in here we can set this up. So the first thing we'll need to do is set up a ball, and we're just going to call this camera toggle and say that it's by default false, and this can be a private variable. And then we'll just go into this update, this late update function, and in here we just want to check, is the camera toggle true? And in fact I'm going to set as default true, sorry. And then from there we just make sure that this bit of code is in these brackets, and there we have it. This will now only happen if this variable equals true, but then we need to give the player a way of setting this variable as untrue or true. So we can just create a update function, and we can say if input dot get key down, and then we'll say y, key code y. And then if that's true, that the y is down, we'll just say if camera toggle is true, then it will become false. So camera toggle equals false. And we'll do an else statement and say and that would be if the camera toggle's already false, then it would actually become true. So we'll just say equals true and do that. Now if we go back into Unity with that all set up and then click play, you'll notice the player's moving and the camera's following. But then if I click Y, the player moves without the camera. And then if I press Y once again, it snaps back to the player straight away, which is really good. It's what we want. But then the next part we need to consider is, now that the camera isn't following the player, how do we move the screen? And the simplest way to go about this is we're just detecting if the mouse is at the edge of the screen, like in most Moba games, you're able to push the screen in various directions. So what we'll do is we'll go and set that up in our script. So we'll just go back to the script now. And from here we'll need to say if the camera toggle is false, so camera toggle equals false, then we'll need to set up whether or not the mouse is on the side of the screen. So to do that, we're going to need a variable to measure where the mouse is. So we'll just say mouse position, and we'll say this is equal to the input dot mouse position. So we're just getting a vector free to tell us where the mouse position is. Then from there, we'll use this vector free and we'll do various statements to detect where it is on the screen. So if it's less than or equal to 0, that means it's on the left side of the screen. So from there, so what we'll need to do here is set up a camera position variable. So we'll just say camera position, and that will be a vector free. And we'll just say it's equal to transform dot position. So this is the transform and position of the camera, because the script is attached to the camera, and we're just setting this as a vector free. So now in our if statement we can say camera position dot x, because we just want the x axis, is minus equal to, we can do like 1 times time 1 times time dot delta time. So what this would do is it would pan 1 in the left direction because we're going in the minus x every time per unit of time that has passed, essentially. So this would be fixed regardless of the frame rate of the game or how often this is called, because it's based on time. What we might do though is actually set this up as a variable. So we'll say public, and we can just say pan speed, and we'll say equal to 10f. And sorry, I forgot to declare the variable. It'd be a float. So public float pan speed, and that'll be 10f. And we'll just put this in here. This is probably good to be a public variable because this is something that you will probably want to put in a options menu, so a player can set the preference of how fast their camera pans. But for now, we're just setting it up, so we won't worry about that too much. And now we just need to do this 4 more times, but we have to do it as an else if statement. And we'll just want to check, let's see. So we'll just need to say that it's greater than or equal to the screen width. And that should be good. And then what we'll need to do is increase the X position. And we'll just do this once again. But this time it will be less than or equal to, and it will just be 0 once again. And this time it will be the y-axis, and it will also be the y-axis in the if statement. And everything can stay the same. And then actually, if it's less than 0, it's in the minus direction, sorry. And it's also important to realize that the camera is actually moving in the Z. So if we go back into Unity for a second, if you think of the axis on our screen, so this is the y-axis in the vertical, and this is the x in the horizontal. So in the if statements, we're doing x and y for up and down, or x for across, y for up and down. But if you look in here, actually Z is up along our map and X is across. So if we go back to the script, hopefully that makes sense to you that these need to be in the Z direction. And then this last if statement is just greater than, and it will be the screen dot height. And last but not least, we'll need to make sure that we're telling this camera its new updated position. So we'll just say it's equal to the camera position, which we've been editing in these statements. Okay, this needs to be actually in the if statement here. It should only move the position of the camera to this camera if the camera toggle is turned off. So we'll just need to move these two variables and put them inside this if statement. Okay, cool. And now if we go back into the engine, so back in the editor, if we click play, so as default, the camera's following the player. And then if we click Y, the camera is no longer following the player. The player can still move, but then we have mouse controls over where the camera is, and we can pan where we want. Now, obviously we have a pan speed variable here, so we can change this. So that's an option for us as well if we feel like the pan's too slow, too fast. And there we really have it. We've got the main camera functions down. We can toggle whether or not it's following the player. We can control the screen with the mouse, so we can move the camera around to see other locations. Another important part of the camera will be the minimap and being able to click on the minimap to go to that location. So what we want to do now is also set up the minimap for the game. Okay, so to begin making our minimap, I've just created a camera folder, put the camera follow script in there, and we'll just be using this folder to organize our minimap and camera files. So the first thing we'll need to do is create a render texture. So if we just find that here, and then from the render texture, we'll call this minimap texture. And you have various settings here. You can increase the size for a higher resolution texture, or you can keep it relatively small depending on your needs. And then from there, what we'll want to do is create a new camera. And we're just going to call this the minimap camera. And so this minimap camera, we're just going to tell it, rather than a normal output, it's going to output to this texture. Now this texture will always render what's ever on this camera, so we can move this camera as needed to render stuff for us. So as you can see in the preview here, we've got an idea of what's being rendered in the minimap camera. So we just want this camera pointing down over our map. So that's pretty easy. We just say 0. I think put like 50 in the Y, 0 here. We want it to be orthographic and we want it to be facing downwards. And we'll want the size to be 50. That should be good. So the difference between perspective and orthographic is it'd be a camera with a field of view. So if I change the field of view, you can kind of see it zoom in and out and you kind of get a 3D perspective. Orthographic is just a straight overhead kind of linear look at what we're doing, and that's much better for our minimap. Is 55 better? No, I think 50 was perfect. And now what we'll want to do is render this camera texture onto an image that's on our screen. So what we'll want to do here is go to our hierarchy and create a new UI element, and we want to call this make a canvas, and this canvas will just be let's just call it main canvas for now, and I'll just put this up here. And basically, if you've never used the UI elements in Unity, basically the canvas is just attached to the screen, the main camera, and then that way you can put all your UI elements and it will track with the camera. So from there, we just want to create a UI image. And then on this image, we'll just call this minimap image. And then if we go to the main canvas, minimap image, I'll just put gizmos on so we can see the main canvas. And this is just the canvas right now. And what I want to do is move this down to the bottom right hand corner. For the anchor, we'll just anchor it to the right bottom. To set this up, I'm just going to click Alt, left click here, and you can also do Shift to change the pivot. And then what's good about that actually is position relative to the corner. So I'll just say -10, +10. And for now, we'll leave it at that. So what we want to do is render our minimap texture into this image, but unfortunately this image only accepts sprites. So we'll have to remove this component and use a new component, and that will be a raw image. And then we can just throw this texture in there. And all of a sudden we've got our minimap showing there. So what I'll do is just quickly press play. And as you can see now, we've got our minimap. It's rendering those little minions, it's rendering the player, it's rendering everything on the camera in this small little corner minimap, which is kind of cool. I'm just going to make it 200 by 200. It felt a little small, but I wasn't too certain. One thing we'll want to do though is it's not necessarily that we want to render everything in camera. We want the minimap to kind of look or to give us symbols that look like the minions or look like the player. That's what we want to render, not necessarily the specific bird's eye view of the map. So what we can do to do that is if we go back into our minimap camera and we can call what we actually render. So if we go to rendering and then culling mask, we can first say nothing, and then that's going to render nothing for us. But then we can start to add things in. So for example, we want to add in the ground. We could add in the minions as they spawn. We could render the walls also. Do the walls have their own layer? No. Okay, let's add a layer for this. So we'll just say walls, and that's layer 7. So we'll just render the wall, we'll put the walls on layer 7. And then if we go back to the minimap camera, we can see the walls as well. Now for the actual minions, what I want to do is actually render a sprite beneath them and use that sprite and have it only render on the camera. So what we can do is if we go into our assets and then we go into minions, go into the minion prefab, we can actually create a sprite. We create an empty there and we say minimap icon, and then we add a component and we'll just say sprite. And now we just need to put an icon for our sprite. So I'm just going to get a blank square I have. Just drag this in and put this as the sprite. Oh, we'll need to set this up as a 2D sprite, apply, go back in and then just set this up. And we'll want to rotate this -90. And we'll want to put it below that, and we're going to want to put it on its own layer, and we can just have a minimap layer. So we'll just call this, I'll bring it down here, just put it on layer 20 minimap, and then go back to the icon, put this on the minimap layer, and this we should set this to be either blue or red depending on the minion, but for now we'll just set it as white, and that should be fine. And then if we just save the prefab and go back into our scene, what we'll need to do then is go to the main camera and say culling mask, don't render anything in the minimap, and then on the culling mask on our minimap camera we'll want to render it. So now when we click play, because everything's on the right layer, all the minions should show up as white squares. Okay, back in the prefab, I noticed a small error we were getting. So we'll just want to make sure that this is actually set to like 0.1 in the Y, because it was falling beneath the ground and therefore wasn't rendering. So if we go back into the scene, click play, now you'll see that all of these squares are rendering along with everything else we want to render, representing the minions. We're getting a few issues here. One is we're not getting the color of the minions, which we'll need to assign to each sprite as they are instantiated. And the other problem is it's rotating with the minion. We just want it to actually be a static square that doesn't rotate following the parent. So inside the minion prefab, if we want to get this minimap to not rotate with its parent, we're going to have to add a script. We'll say new script, and we'll call this minimap rotation script. And then if we open this up, okay, so the script we'll need to do is we'll need to set up a quaternion and just call this rot, so for rotation, and then we'll do an awake function and we'll say rot is equal to this dot transform dot rotation, and then we'll do a late update function, and we'll just say this is equal to the transform.rotation. So what it's doing there simply is equal to rot, sorry. And what this is doing simply is it's taking the rotation before any changes are made, saving it, and then just reassigning it in the final update, so a late update. And that way it's never rotated by the parent. So if we go back into Unity, we click play, and then from here you'll be able to see that the little icons on the minimap are no longer rotating. So the other thing we'll need to do is set the color of the minimap icon. This should be pretty easy. We just go to our minion prefab, open up the minion AI script, and we're going to want to create a public game object. And we're just going to call this, let's see, public game object, and we'll say it is the minimap icon, so minimap icon. And then in the start function, where we're testing if the minion is blue or not, we would just say minimap icon dot get component, and then we just need the sprite renderer. We'll say dot color, and then we'll say is equal to color dot blue. And then we'll do the same for the red minion, and that will set up its minimap icon to red. So if we save this, go back into Unity. Now when we click play, we're getting an error there, so we'll just need to go back and see what that is. Let's see, the minions, minimaps. I know what the error is. So if we just go back into our prefab, and then we need to actually say the minimap icon is this icon in the prefab. So then if we click save, play, and there we go. We've got the colors showing up on the minimap. And so we've got pretty much all the minimap functionality that we need for this episode set up. We've also been able to set up our camera panning so we can come off the locked and fixed camera and move around as required. One last thing I'll do before this episode ends is I noticed we were getting an error message in the console. So if I just clear that, I believe that's because we now have two cameras and they both had audio listeners on. So we'll just disable that on this camera, and then when we click play again, I believe that error message should go away. Cool. Yeah, no more error message. And one more thing I think I'll do before I end the episode is if I go over to this main canvas, go to the minimap, I think I'm just going to add a component to the minimap image, and that would just be an outline. And if we just set this to 5 and just play that and see how that looks. What color is it? It's black, but it's okay. So yeah, just by adding an outline, it gives a bit of a distinction, a bit of clarity of what we're looking at. So I'll just make sure the alpha is set to full. And I'll save that. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please consider giving a subscribe, commenting, or checking out our Patreon. Thank you for watching.